You know what? Most of us will sit here and we'll wonder, have you ever thought about committing suicide? What does it actually feel like? And then what does it mean to have purpose in life? Well, in this episode, Frank Sheldon is going to tell us a little bit about, it's not even a little bit, it's actually what happens with suicide.
Creating curiosity by asking better questions. This is Shed Talk.
You know what, Frank? Thanks for joining me on Shed Talk. Good to have you here.
Thank you, Kevin. I'm really glad to be here. It's an honor, actually. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Frank, what was interesting, you were introduced to me by some of our producers to say to come on, you got to talk to this guy because he's owned businesses, he's in law, he does so many things, but where his whole life started was on the suicide note, where a lot of people actually, when we talk about mental health, really need to deep dive in that whole situation of suicide. That's why I want to get you right into, let's talk about that, the suicide part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's out of all the different talks that I've ever given or the topics I've discussed, to me, it's the one that's most dear to my heart. So I appreciate the opportunity to, one of the things I really like about your podcast is that you like to expand awareness and curiosity through asking the right kinds of questions. I find that a lot of times in discussions of suicide, we don't get to those questions. So I'm looking forward to being able to chat about those today.
And what's interesting, because I wanted to dive right into it, because a lot of listeners, and we listen to this, that, oh yeah, I have suicidal thoughts, I've done it, but I want to really dive into it and about why, and then start
Sure.
with the story, and then I'm going to
Mhm.
deep dive as we're going, because then we can ask deeper questions that a lot of listeners want to know
Sure.
about their lives, about, well, and your life, and how
Yeah.
we can be a better human. So
Thank
I'm
you.
going to start you right off in there. Please start with the story, which is amazing.
So 2014, I actually had a life that I loved. I relationship wise, lived in a beautiful, one of the more expensive homes in the area. I had a great lifestyle, was a member of several private clubs, had a thriving legal practice, also had 20 years into the US military. Had left that the year before in 2013 out of the Army National Guard, a couple of Iraq tours. But if you would have asked me at the beginning of October of 2014, did I love my life and everything about it, I would have given a resounding yes. Absolutely. Everything was going the way that I wanted it to go. And then at the end of August, though, I couldn't get out of bed. My ability to do anything basically disappeared within a very short period of time. Ended up months later being diagnosed with a rather rare debilitating virus that within about 6 months kills about 50% of the people who get it, and within 3 years, about 84%, according to one study, have passed away. It was originally thought that this virus only attacked healthy people. It later we learned that the healthy ones were the only ones who survived. So I spent about 6 months in bed, maybe getting up a half an hour a day, twice a day, and then being so exhausted from being up for half an hour, I'd have to go back to bed for another 11 hours just to recover. Had to close my business. Everything about my life pretty much disappeared. Not making the income that I'm used to, not being the provider that I always wanted to be. I also had, up to that point, which I thought was a strength of mine. Now I look back at it and say, not so much, but a very strong ego, used to get in my way, used to provide, being able to help people, but I was never one that needed help. After about a year of hundreds of doctor appointments and blood tests and scans and x-rays, etc., continuing to be offered no hope by the medical community, I decided to end my life. If My decision was if I cannot live on the terms that I want to live life by, I'm not going to bother. There were thoughts that there were people who didn't like that decision of mine. Was not as important to me as that this was my decision and this was what I was going to do.
So you told people you were going to do this to end your life.
Yes.
So how did you, so you're feeling down, okay, obviously, and I'm saying down like that you're there and you're saying, okay, listen, I want to end my life. You're telling people you're going to do this. And it's not like a
Well, not like
suicide.
every day and not really super explicit to the entire world, but yeah, there were times where I'm voicing that this is what's going on with me. I'm just being real, and this is where I'm at.
And did they
Now,
actually believe you? Were they believing what you were saying? They say, you know what, I want to end my life right now. Um,
people who have known me a long time know that I don't joke about such things. Yeah. So then one of the questions is from someone hearing that, what do you do about it? Because based on the laws in the state of Washington at the time where I lived, how can you incarcerate someone for their own protection? Does that make sense? Yeah. And the answer to that question is no. Just because someone says something like that doesn't mean that you can have them locked away in a mental institution for their own protection. So they have to do a little bit more. Years before, by the way, this is part of my background. I actually written the mental health advance directive legislation for the state of Washington. My initial undergrad degree is in abnormal psychology. My postgraduate goal was actually not initially to be an attorney. It was to be a forensic psychologist like Alex Cross and the James Patterson novels. I was a huge fan of those. But through a couple of twists of fate, I ended up going to law school instead. So I had that kind of background where I thoroughly understand these issues and know where the line is and how not to cross it.
but did you believe, as your studies go before, okay, that you've gone to school, you've done everything, your life before, then all of a sudden here you are, you're going to talk about, I'm going to end my life. Did you ever think before this that you would ever hit that stage of your life?
Oh, never. No, absolutely no. No, no, no. Prior to this disease, no, that was never an issue. No, I loved my life and everything about it. That
And to
was
be able to see it, like to be able to go to that part, just that you're on the
it.
darkest side.
Absolutely, and that's a great question. So when you were prompting this in the beginning of what's it like to go from one point to the other, from not having a history of what some people might say is a certain kind of mental illness that lends itself to continuous suicide actions. And there are those. Absolutely. Totally understand that. That's not my background. So I made a plan which involved um, not giving myself an easy out. One evening, my wife at the time, two boys went to a soccer game. One of them was on a soccer team. I generally, for quite a while, could not go to those events. In the past, I was really proud of being able to go to those events. I was an active parent involved in kids sports, etc., and active in church, and that was just all part of my identity. And all of a sudden, all of this is gone. Pretty much everything that I identified with, which when you get to where I'm at today and the concepts I talk about now, that kind of identification is actually part of the problem. But that's where I was at the time. So I had this really strong identification with things, and that identification is now completely shot. Everything that I liked about my life in my mind and the narrative that I'm creating is now over, and I can't get it back based on everything that we know from doctors, etc. This is going to be my life. Not gonna, it's not a disease that was going to kill me necessarily. even though I said that the percentage chances are really high, but if you survive like the first 6 months that get 50% of the people, I could live with this for decades and never regain the life that I want. So, like I was saying, my decision came because I'm used to living life on my own terms. And I decided if I can't do that, then I'm not going to. It was that straightforward, non-emotional, logic ration, ego-based, not thinking about necessarily the impact on other people. I was going to leave that for them to figure out. I was just doing this because my identity is I live life on my terms and now I can't. And so I'm not going to bother. And it was that straightforward.
Is that ego?
That's ego all the way. Absolutely. So there's a good replacement for that, which is part of what the soul building that I'm creating and talking to people now, which is this diagram over here. There is a really good replacement for that. So the story that night, I went to the Fort Lewis, just outside the Fort Lewis military base that I had recently been retired from after 20 years. And I started contacting people and sending people goodbye texts. I waited for, because we'd already talked about this, and it was not that people are really surprised, but especially my daughter, who happens to be an RCMP officer in British Columbia, she knew, and that I was ending my life that night. She knew that, even though I didn't specifically say it in any of the texts, but when she looked at that, she knew exactly what was going on. And she contacted some authorities to start some intervention. My phone sent me an alert that basically said, "You've been pinged." I took the battery out. I dropped the phone and the battery in the dirt. And then I went to about 45 minutes away. So everybody who was looking for me was zeroing in on that spot right outside of Fort Lewis. And being involved in the JAG Corps at Fort Lewis, I knew what was going to happen, which is security is going to be alerted, MPs are going to be called, there's going to be a search from the Quick Reaction Force of that specific location, but the base is going to be put on alert. Shortly before that, there was a suicidal vet at Fort Hood who took a few soldiers out on the way before killing himself, and that's always a huge issue in the military. So that's a concern. It's what they have to respond to, even though there was nothing ever in my character, any statements I've ever made that I would ever intentionally harm anyone else. That was never my intention. But they can't, when you're looking at base management and base security, they can't assume that. They have to put out a reaction force that's basically saying, here's a recently retired veteran, instability, PTSD, whatever they're going to do, and a loaded weapon right outside our base. They're going to respond in a certain way. And they did, but I wasn't there anymore. So I went to the Tahoma National Cemetery. It's about, like I said, 45-ish minutes away. By the time I got there, it's about 11 o'clock at night. I locked my keys inside my car and took my weapon and walked into the cemetery, and I was going to just pull the trigger. I was a tad bit concerned about the staff at the cemetery in the sense that I left a note inside the windshield and told them, because I was right by the gate, and there was a note in large letters they could read through the windshield that says, "This is who I am, this is what I'm doing, and you're going to find me over there," and just giving you a heads up. So I went to that spot, and I'd been to the cemetery before. We had, with our 2 tours in Iraq, we had sadly several soldiers buried there. So I knew the grounds, went to this particular area, and I had the weapon off, put the safety off, finger on the trigger. And then something happened for which today I have no explanation. Beings started showing up, roughly maybe 20, 'in a semicircle. 10, 12, well, you're in Canada, that's meters, 3, 4 meters away. So no lips moving. I've always been curious, like, why do ghosts need clothes? I don't know, but they're all dressed. They're not really there. Like, and it's almost like a rainbow. Like you try to walk into a rainbow, you can't. Like if I walk toward them, I didn't try to do that. This was not a night for let me do some ethereal supernatural investigations, which I've done. I've been playing with that all my life, but all of a sudden, like there they are. And I'm like, I don't believe in ghosts hanging around cemeteries, waiting for somebody to show up so they can engage them in a conversation. Like that is not on my list of things I believe in. But there it was. So I'm pretty sure that my mind did not manufacture this. And nobody moving their lips yet. There was a very audible single voice coming from this group of 20 that basically said, why are you here? So I actually re-engaged the safety, pointed the weapon down, although I don't know why. Like, let's say I accidentally fired a bullet in the other direction. What's going to happen? I'm not going to hit it and can't kill anybody. But that's just out of habit, being in the military. So put the safety back on, put the weapon down, engaging them in conversation and telling them exactly why I'm there. And they go, okay. The motto of that cemetery, at least at the time, I don't think they've changed it, but at the time, the motto of the cemetery is where heroes rest. And that is what I wanted to do. That is also how I saw the afterlife. It was a rest. There's nothing to it. There's nothing active. I'm not going to be a ghost going around having, issues, things like that. So I just wanted to rest. That's what I was going to do. And basically, after I'm done talking, they said, okay. And I was thinking, like, whoa, they're not even going to try to talk me out of it. They're just like, okay. And then they're quiet. So I put the safety back off, put the weapon back, finger back on the trigger. Exact same moment of just before pulling the trigger, they asked another question. The first one was, what are you doing here? This question was, are you sure this is how you want to end your rest? I did not have an answer for that question. I'm like, what do you mean, am I sure? Of course I'm sure. Like, why wouldn't I be sure? And all of a sudden, there was this realization that something hit me. And I started to question about whether how we die impacts what happens to us next. That in fact, we don't rest after we die, that actually we have part of us that lives on after we die, and that part of us that lives on is going to have another experience or adventure. And our life as we live it and how we die impacts that next adventure. We either set ourselves up for failure or success in that next life. I still do not believe in the traditional Christian view of heaven and hell. I also don't believe in the traditional Hindu view of continuous reincarnation. I don't have a 100% answer for what happens next, but I am 100% convinced from this experience and everything I've learned since then, including going back to school, even having a JD and a Master of Laws degrees, going back to school and getting a Master of Divinity degree and a Doctor of Divinity degree and studying this in detail. I am 100% convinced that there is a part of us that survives our physical death, and that part of us is going to go on to something. I also firmly believe that how we live our lives and how we die has an impact on what happens next. We can set ourselves up for success in that next adventure by how we live. That is now the concept of building our souls in this life is what I am about discussing with people these days. It's the shift in my life. That's where I'm at now. It's very different from being a JAG officer, very different from being a tax attorney. It's the new me.
So you look at yourself. I got the story amazing. I want to ask you one question because it was the why. Okay.
Sure.
The line, you're standing there, okay,
Yeah.
and the cemetery is called Where Heroes Lie,
Where
right?
heroes rest.
Where heroes rest.
Yeah.
At that moment, they're talking to you and saying, okay, why are you here? Okay. Now, did you feel like a hero at that time?
I had a lot of people call me that based on actions in the two different deployments in Iraq. I had an article that I wrote, which actually got published in several places, Atlantic Journal and a few other places during my first Iraq tour, where I wrote that we are not all heroes. I personally had a very different definition of hero. Some people are willing to say that anyone who's willing to voluntarily put on a uniform and go to battle for their country is by definition a hero. I did not do that. I don't follow that approach. So it's not a word that I ever used about myself. It was a word that was used about me many times.
So
Did
I
I
want to,
feel that way about myself in that moment? No. But what I
and
wanted was to rest.
Hey, take a minute and smash that subscribe button, and let's get back to the episode.
and that's where I want to dig down deeper into this and that question and the why, and you wanted to rest. And here you are at the cemetery. Okay,
Yes.
you put the note outside.
Yes.
You're in a state of mind shift,
Hmm.
okay, because you're ready to change your mind, meaning it's going to be over. And then when you see the cemetery and it's named for heroes, and your interpretation of heroes at that moment, that to rest in this place of heroes, does that mean by me taking my life that I become the rest of the heroes for rest? As this is my soul that's going to be, and I'm using soul as an energy, not as a religious fact,
Yes.
that if this is if this is my time and place, what this is, am I willing to actually expand my soul, as in my energy level out there? And this place just happens to be where heroes lie, and the ghosts at the time are saying, "Are you sure this is the place for you?"
The specific question they asked was, are you sure this is how you want to enter your rest, not where?
And then
I
how?
I was probably I had no idea whether I would be buried there or not. I had left no burial instruction plan. I didn't, even though I was an estate planning attorney, it's what I did for the JAG Corps. I created all of these documents for soldiers and officers, and I didn't have any of that myself. I had no idea if I was going to be buried there, and I really didn't care.
But not the burying. I'm not talking the burying.
Right.
You die, your body just goes somewhere, okay?
Yes.
It goes in the ground. We get that. But it's all of a sudden where your place of being, who you are right there at that moment in time, you're seeing this, okay? Like it's an out of body experience for yourself.
In some sense, it is. Yes, absolutely.
And they're talking to you, and then from that moment of all of a sudden it's a no. And where did you go after you drove away? Because you locked your keys in the car.
That is Kevin, that's a fascinating, it's a great question. That is a fascinating part of the story. So yes, I locked the keys in the car. I couldn't drive away. Unless I was willing to bust a window. What happened next is, I don't want to use the word bizarre. I think there's a lot of words. Maybe that's a close one. Okay, so here's what happened. Let me back up a second. When I first showed up and I'm parking my car, I'm getting out of my car, I heard what I thought was a gunshot off in the distance. If I'm facing this direction, it was over there. Somewhere over there, I heard a gunshot. And I'm thinking, I'm way out in the country. I don't know there's guns out here. There's almost no homes around here. Like, whatever. I know a lot of people out in the country, in the county, that have weapons. Whatever. I don't know, somebody shooting at a rabbit or a wolf. It doesn't matter. It wasn't threatening. I just paid it no attention. I just was very focused on why I was there and what I was going to do. But it does become significant. So I get back to my car. My keys are not there. I have made a decision to live. I have made a decision to choose my life the way that it was. I, in that moment, am willing to live the life that this life in this body with everything that's going on, I'm willing to live this life, even though I have judgments that most of it sucks. I am still going to live this life that is mine to live. And that's what I've done since then. So I get back to the car with this very different mindset than then you're exactly right. Than when I walked in. I saw down the road now a different direction, opposite 180 degrees from where I heard the gunshot. There was a house down there. I saw a car driving in. Very few homes out there at that time. Probably still. I decided to walk over to the house. Why someone was coming home this late at night, I have no idea. But I had no plan for this because my plan was to be dead. I didn't need to have thought this through in advance. There was not going to be a this part. So this is all spontaneous in the moment, just responding to what's going on. I walk over to the house. He had just gone inside. I knock on the door. You got to figure way out in the county here. Here's a stranger, no car, walks up to the door after this guy comes home. And he's looking at me like, and I said, have an emergency with my vehicle out there. Do you mind if I use the phone? He said, where's your car? And I told him, he said, I didn't see a car out there. And I was like, well, a little back before where you turned, you probably wouldn't have seen it, but that's where it's at, right by the cemetery. He said, well, I'm not going to let you in the house, but he handed me a phone. I called my wife that I was married to at the time. She did not answer. She was down at Fort Lewis as part of this operational cell that was looking for me, and there's a lot of people involved. I did not know it at the time. Her battery was dead. I didn't know, but she had been on the phone trying to coordinate, trying to find me, etc. Her battery had died. So I left her a message and I said, this is where I'm at. I went back to the car and sat down and fully expected the police to show up and come pick me up. What I had done that night, I carried a firearm onto a federal cemetery, which is illegal. It's a felony. What I had done just outside of Fort Lewis was a felony. I was an attorney. I could very easily lose my law license over this. I knew that. When I made the choice to live my life, I also knew that I had just made my life infinitesimally more complicated than it was before I walked in. Like if there was a reason to end my life, I had just enhanced that. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I might be facing disbarment. I might be facing jail time. I had no clue. I just knew I had said yes to living my life and I was willing to accept whatever consequences came my way. I left that message on the phone. I went back to the car. And like I thought, 5 minutes later, the cop showed up. And they walked up and there I am sitting by the car at midnight, way out in the county, outside the cemetery. And the driver rolls the window down and said, did you hear a gunshot? And I said, yeah, a while ago. And it came from, and I pointed, it was from that direction. And they said, yeah, that's about the time that somebody called in hearing a gunshot. And they said, by the way, what are you doing out here? And I said, my name's so-and-so. Were you not responding to my phone call? And they said, what phone call? And they said, by the way, do you know there's an APB out for you, statewide APB out for you? And I said, well, I didn't know that, but I'm not surprised. And they said, do you know we have to take you in, right? And I said, yeah. So they were there because of that gunshot, not because of my phone call. My phone call wouldn't even be listened to for hours. I can't explain that either, any more than I can explain what showed up in the cemetery that night. Is that even a real gunshot? I know someone, we love to talk about metaphysical and space aliens and time travel and warp quantum fields and things like that. And he firmly believes that that was another dimension of this whole experience where I actually had committed suicide, and that was my gunshot.
Right.
And I was like, that's really weird. I don't believe that either. But he still loves me. Anyways, so I don't know where that gunshot came from. That's what they were responding to. That somebody heard a gunshot from that location. And that was an hour later, they finally show up. So they call for a different car. They're not equipped to take me where to take me in. So they call for a different vehicle. I get handcuffed, back of a vehicle. I get taken to a hospital that has a psychiatric ward for criminal people. Never been in such a room before in my life. Would never want to be in one again. There's like a bench that just is part of the wall and kind of hole that you can pee into if you have to. There's nothing in there, nothing that you can use to take your own life. Uh, it's the kind of cell that Jeffrey Epstein should have been in. I don't know.
Mhm.
Maybe he didn't commit suicide. I don't really know. I wasn't there.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's nothing in this room that you can use to harm yourself or other people. It's very bare. And that's where I was taken. So then the next step was there had to be some type of evaluation done by a trained psychologist in this field who makes a determination of what happens to me next. That's not a place that they can hold people, it's an evaluation space. So the determination was made based on my conduct that night, my cooperation, including with the police officer showing up, based on who I was, the influence in the community I've had, whatever, I was deemed to not be a risk to other people. I could have been that night referred for criminal charges. I was not. There was a new program that was created in King County for veterans that basically, if they were faced with certain kinds of legal issues, they could instead go to a veterans court. This was the very first, and I actually helped start it. It was the very first veterans court of its kind in the state of Washington. It was like a test program. So I was allowed to go through that program, and I was sent to a 30-day treatment at the Veterans Hospital in Seattle for mental health issues. So that's the result of what happened that night.
So I want to ask one question in here,
Yeah.
because it's really interesting. Is a lot of people, you're in the suicide area, meaning you're ready to end your life, and you see your ghosts, you're talking,
Yes.
and then they're asking that question,
Yes.
what is the dial? Okay, and we're going to ask is what is that changing point that all of a sudden it was like, I'm ready to end it, and then all of a sudden, no, I want to live life. There's a time frame, like within
Yeah.
minutes, that all of a sudden you look at doom and gloom in your head, you're seeing all the bad things, it's over, it's over. And I'm going to call it a pity party, meaning because when you're in that stage, you didn't care what other people thought. It was more that
Correct.
you wanted to rest. Then all of a
Yes.
sudden it becomes the next question that you're asking yourself to ask a better question on this whole thing is like, no, I want to live with the disease I have and be the best human that I possibly can and give back. Where at that particular
I didn't go quite as far as to say give back yet. That came later.
later,
But everything you said up to that was accurate. Yes.
so where's that one tip? What was the one tipping point that said with the needle all of a sudden changed? Because there's people out there that have their stories and they're talking about suicide and they're talking about, okay, here's all the reasons why I'm not. But then all of a sudden it comes to it's switching over. It's going to the other side. Where's the tipping point? What was yours? That defining moment, that one 30-second moment.
It, in some sense, could be construed as a Saul meets a blinding light on a road to Damascus going out to kill people episode. It's almost that impactful and that immediate, like you're talking about. For me, it was going back to your earlier question. In that moment, I did not feel like a hero. I would not be remembered as a hero walking into the cemetery. I didn't care. But in that, the real issue in the moment was this nagging thought that was implanted in me that how I died mattered to what happens next. Their use of the word how was really bugging me. Are you sure this is how you want to enter your rest? And my brain was saying, why does it matter? Why does it matter how I die? I didn't believe in that. It didn't matter. But to them, they're implying it did. And I didn't have the answer to that question. And so I was thinking initially, I can do this another time. I want to find the answer to that question first. I want to know whether how matters. Because if and like I said, today, 10 years, 12 years later, um, it does, in my opinion. It matters a lot.
So
So
how does how matter?
in a broader perspective, if we take a look at, for example, several religions and philosophies, for example, Buddhism, intentional harm is one of the worst things that we can do to our own soul.
Mhm.
I was about to commit intentional harm
Right.
to an innocent human being, me.
Right.
It's equivalent of murder. I do believe now, and I did not at the time, but I do believe now how we live our lives affects our soul. You had mentioned earlier, you were referring to the soul as like a vibration or an energy. I think now when you look at studies, including scientific studies in consciousness and awareness, we can take our entire existence and basically collapse it into a single unique frequency that is we could say that that's me. This frequency is one way of looking at it. It's more to it than that, but that's one way of looking at it. What is that frequency? How is that frequency created? When you look at all of the different things that we do and collapse it into that one frequency, for example, I commit intentional harm against an innocent human being. I change that frequency. Does that make sense? Now, we
Yes.
take that unique frequency. If we were to look at it on a scale of what a lot of philosophies teach of everywhere from like love to hate. So here's a hate frequency, here's a love frequency, and everything in between. Whatever frequency we're at, that's our starting or launching point after this body dies. That what lives on after us goes from that space. Does that make sense? And so, in
Yep.
other words, whatever happens to us next is going to be different depending on what the frequency is. Now, where it goes from there, I have a lot of theories. I've read dozens, hundreds of near-death experiences, different encounters. I've looked at this from a lot of points of view. I have nothing definitive. I have actually more questions than I have answers, but I do 100% believe that that is our launching point, and it's going to launch us somewhere in a particular direction. I want the best experience for myself. I want to set myself up for success in that realm. That's the one to me that really counts more than this one. That one counts more because it's the eternal one. This is pure, this is going to go away at some point. It's gone, never to return, this particular physical existence. That one's going to go on for a long time. Why would I not want to set myself up for success in that realm? And I do now. So I have reoriented my life to think of that primarily on a daily basis and say, how do I live my life today such as that is going to be have the best impact for that future? And that's the mindset I was talking about. I think 8 billion people on the planet should adopt that mindset.
Perfect. All right. So final question for you. We're going to wrap this up because we
Yes,
want
sir.
everybody to like, share, follow you, go over this. All right. The one question we haven't asked you. So what was the disease called?
It doesn't have a good name. It's actually, you can't catch it. The body has to create it. And there's some various theories about how the body creates this. but basically there are some processes where when bodies undergo certain physical strains, for example, like a vaccine. So somebody gets vaccinated. The theory behind a vaccine is the body looks at that and says, oh, something bad that we've never seen before. Let's put a bunch of stuff together and go attack that, right?
Right.
So now we take a look at, I had a very serious infection inside my jawbone to the point where they actually had to cut my jawbone open, and the inside of my jaw had actually turned to mush. It's a pretty rare issue in and of itself, but if that infection even moves that far, essentially you're dead.
Right.
So we caught it in time, we fixed it. Now, what we didn't know at the time and didn't know until about a year later when I couldn't come out of bed is my body had built something to fight that infection. Does that make sense? It built something, okay? Now, what it built actually proved to be deadly. At the time, my body is trying to fight something that is deadly and is actively killing me. But what it created out of that was something that essentially depleted all of the B cells in my body.
Mm.
It's a pseudo autoimmune issue, and there's a lot of variations, which is why it doesn't really have a name. There's a lot of
Right.
variations of how the body can put this together, but it's more of a process than it is a thing per se.
So you get to name it.
Um,
If you were to name it, what would you call it? Because it was life-changing for you. It totally changed the way your perspective was then to today. So if you were to name it, what would it be named? But I'm going to leave that with you
that's a
because that could
great
be
question.
because that
By
could
the
be in your
way,
next book.
but possibly,
Yeah.
but like I said, we've already got three in
Yeah.
one. But one of the things that I would love to do is, as this is expanding, I want to do more in-persons of these, and I'd
Right.
love to come to Calgary and see you.
You know what? The door is wide open, and it's been an honor having you on here.
Thank you.
It
So
is
let's
going to
let's
be
hold that
outside.
question till then when I come see you
Done.
in
And then
person.
you have to answer it,
I
and it's got
will.
to be so cool, and it'll be
It's going to be very cool.
Wikipedia-ified. It'll be Wikipedia-ified. You know what? Frank, thank you for being on Shed Talk. Like, share, you guys have fun today, and great episode. And thanks again, Frank, for joining us.
Thanks, Kevin. It's been a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you in person sometime. Ciao for now.
Now you know. Shed Talk.